Welcome, webinar viewers. My name is Ryan McQueenie. I'm with the communications team here at Wespath. To my left, three of my colleagues on the investment management team. All the way down at the end there is Raj, our Director of Investment Research, making his webinar debut in the middle. Thank you so much for joining us. Andrew, our Senior Investment Analyst, and of course, our Director of Public Markets, Quach, coming back to the table with us. Thank you all for being here this morning. We're going to talk about some exciting work you all have been up to over the past quarter and beyond that. October 1st, we launched a brand new fund for institutional investors, the International Equity Index Fund I-Series IEIF-I. Lunch on me if we can get through the whole webinar segment with getting all those letters in the row correctly. We've also have some exciting updates and a bunch of research and work that has gone into those updates for our balance fund, the multiple asset fund in the I-Series as well, and just getting a sense of all the research rigor and collaboration that went into the process for all of that work. So thank you all for joining me, and we're going to jump straight into IEIF-I because it is the latest news on October 1st, our latest fund launch. Well, I'll stick with you because I know you were part of the development, fund construction, manager selection for that fund really since the beginning. What motivated Wespath to launch the International Equity Index Fund at this time?
Well, Ryan, I have to try to take on your challenge. IEIF-I was launched at this time because we're always trying to enhance our funds, and we want to be mindful of what our investors are looking for. And there's definitely been an increase in demand for cost-effective passive alternatives in the non-U.S. equity markets. If you look at our U.S. equity funds, we have passive options there. And we just weren't offering that on the international side for our clients, so it just made sense. So part of our investment philosophy is that we try to combine active and passive in a way that makes sense for our investors. And we didn't have that option for our clients on in the international side. We did that within our international equity fund. But this way, having IEIF-I allows our clients to do the same for their portfolios.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good overview of the fund and the rationale for it. As you hit on passively managed fund, it's also benchmarked to the MSCI World ex-US Index, so international developed stocks in the benchmark. And I think that's a good shift because you mentioned the alignment with our investment philosophy. And so, Andrew, I wanted to kick it over to you with that in mind. You were also close to a lot of the research and process that went into building IEIF-I, and I think that research and rigor is a really key part of our investment philosophy as well. How else would you say this fund reflects our investment philosophy in action?
Yeah, I think I do want to highlight that research component first, and then we can talk about the thoughtful blend of active and passive management that Quach just discussed as well. But one portion of our investment philosophy is this commitment to investment research. And we want to make sure that every decision that we make is supported by both research and data. So when we decided that we wanted to launch a passive option for International Equity Fund, we took a step back and did some research about what is the industry standard in terms of what exposure should this fund have. Through peer universe comparisons, data and investment, and understanding the opportunity set, we landed on that World ex-US benchmark. The second part of our investment philosophy and process that I think the launch of the fund highlights is the thoughtful blend of active and passive management. We believe that passive equity management, as Quach mentioned, is a cost-effective way to get equity market exposure for our investors. And with launching this fund, it complements the actively managed international equity funds and gives our investors a way to customize their international equity exposure, another key component of our investment philosophy. When we looked at this, research shows that active management is most effective in developed large and mid-cap equities, and active management is most effective in small caps and emerging markets.
So passive more effective in the large and mid-cap, which this benchmark and this index fund covers. Active management more effective in the spots that aren't in this benchmark.
Yes, and we as Wespath will be thoughtfully blending these two exposures within International Equity Fund as well, where IEIF will serve as the passive allocation to the fund.
Great, thank you for running us through that, Andrew. Raj, I think another theme here that's really important is choice. And Andrew mentioned that customization piece of it. This is now our third fund launch for institutional investors in the past year, actually less than a year. So I think we've shown a real commitment to adding to the breadth of our lineup of investment strategies that are available to the nonprofit organizations that we serve. You are, of course, the chair of our client asset allocation committee, which is responsible for helping clients take those different choices and boil it down into a unique portfolio that's really customized and tailored to their unique needs. How do you think about the role that IEIF can play in that process?
That's a very good question because not any two customers look alike. Their risk needs and return needs are very different. Their entire risk-return profile are different. And this is why we believe there's a role for active and passive both in a well-balanced portfolio. So what we do with this passive new fund, IEIF-I, I think I got it right.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Okay. It's helping us bringing that cost-effective. Hua mentioned, Andrew mentioned, that cost-effective way to get the beta exposure. That's important. And not every part of your portfolio needs to have that alpha extra boost. And IEIF can give you that cost-effective way to get the beta exposure, and it helps create that good combination. So I think that's really important, and we've already had the U.S. Equity Index Fund I series as well. We already combined that with our active U.S. Equity Fund, and now we're doing that with the International Equity Index Fund I series.
Good. Let me just make sure I'm getting a couple key terms there right.
Yeah.
Beta exposure is that market-wide
full
exposure,
market
market risk, and you said alpha as well, which is
The
more
excess
commonly-
return over. So active management can go out and make good selection in their security choices. Through that and through that buy and sell, they're able to generate that little excess return over the beta, the market exposure. That's what's happening in the active funds. It's not happening in the passive fund in IEIF-I. And a good combination of that can give you that good risk control. And we're doing that in our client-focused asset allocation decisions.
Love it. Thank you. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to stick with you, Raj. We're going to shift gears to the multiple asset fund, or MAF, as we sometimes refer to it. It's a balanced fund that invests in 4 different Wespath funds. So it has that fund-to-fund structure, and it has exposure to stocks, bonds, U.S., international markets. So it's a true global balanced fund for investors that are seeking that kind of portfolio. And we've got some updates, some work that's gone into enhancing that fund as well recently. Can you just run us through some of the highlights of the news we've been sharing about MAF recently?
Sure. And there are big changes, significant changes that I want to cover. So I'm glad you're covering that here. First of all, we are retaining the big mix of the balanced fund we've already had. It's a 65% equity, 35% fixed income. That's still there. However, how we have measured that in the past is changing. So there's a benchmark change. For that 65% equity, we are now selecting a MSCI All Country World Index as a representation for that.
The MSCI ACWI.
ACWI
Yes.
is the short version, yes. And I'm glad you're helping me with that because I would have kept tripping up.
Sure.
So MSCI ACWI Index, we believe, is a good representation of the entire opportunity set out there for the equity market.
Sure.
And so the 65% global equity component of MAF is now being proxied by this MSCI ACWI index. Similarly, the 35% is the fixed income. The entire market agrees with the sentiment that a Bloomberg US Ag is a good representation for that. And we're bringing that. By bringing this 65% MSCI ACWI and 35% Bloomberg US Ag, we have now turned the benchmark into a little bit more standardized and easier to measure, well comparable in the market benchmark. However, that's not the only change. That's the benchmark change. There now is the more dynamic allocation changes that's happening in there. So as I mentioned earlier, the 65% equity component, previously what we had there was a 35% US component and a 30% international component. We are now changing that to be a little bit more dynamic and adaptive to the market changes. As we mentioned, MSCI ACWI is a good representation of the entire market. Well, we're looking at that benchmark and looking at how that's changing. Its US and international keeps shifting over time. We now aim to shift with it. So it's a more dynamic approach to asset allocation. And I think it overall improves the fund. And I think it makes it more accountable with how we are managing this fund that represents the market better. And the benchmark is also doing a better job at reflecting what we're aiming to do with MAF-I.
Great. So I'm just going to one follow-up on there because
Sure.
I think we're getting into some policy and procedure that can be a little bit nuanced for folks. So just making sure we're bringing the viewers along with us here. The equity proportion that you just mentioned that being the target allocation process being tied a little bit closer to the MSCI equity. It doesn't necessarily mean the allocations are always going to mirror that of the MSCI equity, but now the process considers the makeup of the MSCI equity in its allocation.
We are looking at MSCI equity makeup, which currently, I think closer to June, it was at 65% US, 35% international, and we're going to continue to look at it and over time adapt with it.
Sure.
We're not going to be able to adapt every day because markets swing up and down on a daily basis, and we want to keep an eye on it. And over time, our process now is to be a little bit more reflective of the market changes.
Okay, and I liked what you said earlier, dynamic, a little bit more dynamic, less tied to a static target. Okay, so there's a lot there, new benchmark, new process and procedure around how we arrive at a allocation for MAF. Quach, when you take a step back and think about ultimately having a fund like that serve the needs of the nonprofit institutional investors that we're working with, how do you think about how these changes in MAF end up being beneficial to the type of clients we're working with?
Right. So, Ryan, one of the things that we took a step back and really tried to understand who our clients were in MAF, and they were these endowment foundations. And so, that really formed the basis for the allocations that Raj mentioned, that there's definitely more of a desire to be closer to market to allow our managers to be the ones that provide the alpha that Raj talked about previously. So by just being a little bit closer benchmark, we focus on more that active manager selection that we have in our fund. And just to get back to that allocation and how being static is not serving the needs of our clients. Raj mentioned that the U.S. equity allocation, ACWI, is about 65%. Not that long ago, it was probably 50%. So, so if you just set your allocation to what it was, 15 years ago, you would be so out of balance with the market. So that's one of the benefits is just really making sure that we're close to the benchmark and really providing the return to our client from our active manager selection.
Okay.
And having just that framework and the rebalancing, it really does hold us more accountable. Raj mentioned the benchmarks that we changed to. Those are the more standard benchmarks endowments and foundations use so that we're measuring our performance versus what our clients are typically seeing and what they're using. So it really holds us accountable for the performance of our funds.
Okay, I like that. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the year when the fixed income fund adopted the Bloomberg US Ag as the new index, that it was a more standardized performance comparison. In other words, it makes it easier for other folks to judge us on how we're doing in those things like manager selection and the allocation process that you described. So I like that theme of accountability really coming through this year and some of the different fund enhancements and work that's gone into to what your team is up to. And Andrew, that's a great segue over to the last question I wanted to ask you, which is really back to that process and philosophy, including our commitment to research and rigor. And you talked about how that applied to finding the benchmark, finding the manager, finding the strategy for the International Equity Index Fund earlier. Can you share a little bit more behind the curtain of our research process, the governance that goes into that, how these frameworks guide decisions like fund launches, updates, all the enhancements and work that we're talking about right now?
Of course, Ryan. When I think about Wespath making investment decisions, there are a few key areas that we want to make sure that we do. One is decisions supported by research and data. Two is that our decisions add value to our clients. And three, they align with our investment philosophy. And anytime that we make an investment decision, you talked about governance, it has to be approved by our internal investment committee. So taking a step back to research, Raj did not really talk about the amount of work that went into this MAF research.
Well, I only gave him a couple minutes.
I know, and he could have gone on for
Yeah.
a long time, but he spent the first 6 months of this year developing this really in-depth research piece about what the most appropriate balanced approach is for institutional investors. And I think that really highlights the rigor and research that goes into our investment decisions. At the same time, within International Equity Index Fund, I-Series, I think I nailed that one, that was another result of our commitment to research in terms of going in depth on what the appropriate benchmark is.
Sure.
And I think as a result of that, we're allowing our clients to create greater flexibility and customization around their asset allocation, which is another key component of our investment philosophy. To sum it all up, though, everything that we do has to be recommended and approved by our internal investment committee after, in-depth discussion, debate, questions, going back and forth several times with that investment committee. And I think it really highlights the importance of the governance structure that we're putting around all the investment decisions that we make.
Sure, super collaborative. It's more than just you three or the folks
Correct.
some people see
Yes.
on the webinar more frequently. Like, there's a lot of folks that are going behind these decisions
Yes.
and are involved in it. So, cool. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on the Q3 webinar. It was really exciting updates for all of our investors, new stuff going on, new enhancements to existing funds. We appreciate you joining and talking us through it.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ryan.